All right, I am seeing us as live. I am going to double check. Yep, YouTube also has us showing as live. So what is up, everybody? You guys probably all know me. I think there are a few people who don't know me very well, maybe coming in from places like the Klingon Language Institute Discord or Facebook or something. But I'm Dapper Dino. This is not my usual content. Usually I focus much more on things like science, Klingon Language Institute Discord or Facebook or something.
Somebody's got it.
I'm Dapper Dino. This is not my usual content. Who is that?
Somebody mute.
It's not me.
Discord or Facebook or something.
Somebody's got it.
This is not my usual content. Who is that?
Somebody mute.
It's not me.
Discord or Facebook or something.
Somebody's got it.
This is not my
Did you figure it out yet?
Who is that? Qunchu'wI, I think that's you. That's giving us that feedback.
How can it?
Somebody's
Did you figure it out yet? All right, testing.
Yep, that was. I'm pretty sure that was Qunchu'wI. Yep. So, Qunchu'wI, you have the stream up somewhere. You're gonna need to mute it. We can't hear you right now. Are you? Oh, pretty sure that was Qunchu'wI. Yep. So,
I don't have the stream anywhere.
The stream up somewhere. I don't know why, but we're getting it whenever we unmute you. So, are you? What I'll do is I'll continue with introductions for DeSDu and see if you can find whatever tab you have it open in. It's got to be somewhere. I'm not sure why. But, all right, and so Bent Hovind is, of course, my regular guest host for Kent with Ben on Tuesdays.
Mm-hmm.
He is also the captain of the Klingon ship that we are playing in...
He voices the captain.
Well, okay, sure. And, of course, we have Qunchu'wI here, but we are working on some technical difficulties there. But we also have DeSDu, and DeSDu runs... like one of the only, if not the only, all Klingon language content channel on YouTube?
I don't know if it's the only. It's probably, yeah, it probably is. There are a couple of others that have a lot of, like, the Klingon teacher from Germany, Levin Latar.
Yes.
Klingon content, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in English and German as well. But yeah, I tend to focus just on Klingon stuff on my channel.
Cool.
Yeah,
yes, and it's nice you. Yeah, I like it. I'm pretty sure I've commented on a few of your videos here and there. Usually in Klingon, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. I love to get responses in Klingon and then talk back to people in Klingon. That's great.
Yeah, actually, I sent my first ever business email in Klingon not that long ago. I contacted the Klingon pop warrior to see if she would be okay with me using a song of hers. So, and my initial, request was in Klingon because I felt like that might go over well if start off that way. And I'm gonna go ahead and unmute Qunchu'wI and see if we've got this sorted. So you should be able to unmute yourself, Qunchu'wI. I don't think I have you as like muted.
No, I don't know.
I don't know. Can you unmute Qunchu'wI?
I can unmute.
Oh, and we're not hearing it?
I muted myself long ago, and I still heard the echo for like another 2 minutes.
Well, it's gone right now, so I don't know. As long as it stays gone, we're good. So let's see. Why don't you tell us about yourself? You are a Klingon instructor, right? Do I have that right? I think you may have muted yourself again.
Yeah, I'm not sure he can hear.
Okay. Well, so let's go ahead and say then, in that case, while we are trying to figure out, you're hearing echo, so you're moving to a different computer. All right, that works. We will. It might also just be that maybe are you listening on speakers rather than headphones? That might be the problem. So, all right, while we're doing that, I'm going to ask the question that came up from Facebook. So I'm going to actually paste it in the comments. And then what I would like to do is I'll just read it out. And then, DeSDu, why don't you give us a nice quick translation for that? So the question that we got from Facebook was, Jack Whippu it Klichbach, Klichvad Kat Tachboch, Klingon Hor on me Tingu, Edge Tirich, Kauraj Padtach Nuk.
So y'all are definitely, y'all are obviously advanced speakers, but what are some of the more difficult aspects of Klingon? If you could talk about those, that'd be great. And what are some of the things that are still challenging your memory? That's a really good question. I don't know. I try to use Klingon on a daily basis, so it's hard to. I try to make it as much a part of my routine as possible, because I just like it so much. Trying to think of something that's really difficult. I suppose sometimes I still have a little bit of picking out the correct prefix. So Klingon, if you're unaware, has this prefix system where you put prefixes on the verb, and these prefixes indicate both the subject and the object of the action that you're describing. And a lot of these use very often, like ve, which means I, it. So veler, I see it, right? Or him or her or them. And da, that's another one, I or you, it. Be, you, no object, and so on and so forth. But some of these you use a lot, but some of them you don't use very often. Some of them you barely ever use, like che, which means see, I'm having che and re are the two that I always mix up. So che is y'all, us, and re is us, y'all. Am I getting that right? Right. So
I'm double checking just to make sure, because
I don't know.
yeah, che is you plural to us.
Right. So, and one of the ways I try to remember that is that there's the Merchant of Venice. There's that one line from Shylock's speech, right? If you pick us, do we not bleed? And that's one of the ways that I try to remember. Yeah. But that's one of the things that still challenges my memory. And then, one of the other things is just talking about, normal everyday things in Klingon, because there is, there's a little bit of there are some lacunae in the vocabulary. Every year it's growing, and I think it's probably a lot easier to deal with those holes than maybe 20 years ago.
At one point there was no word for table. Like, table wasn't a word in Klingon. You had to come up with workarounds to express the idea of a table. But now we have
a flat thing with legs.
Yeah, now we have the nice word rash.
Yeah, he can talk about that more than I can, because I came along. Yeah, I'm like this spoiled brat. I came along when there were, now there's like 4,000 words in the vocabulary, and it's still growing every year. Every year it's kind of funny, because at the I'm like a kid in a candy store, and a whole bunch of other people are always shaking their heads, why are we getting all these new words? It's like 200 words every kepa. I'm having a great time, but
those of us who are old timers, we know what's in the Klingon dictionary, and probably in Klingon for the Galactic Traveler. Everything else is a new word, and we're used to using the old vocabulary, and occasionally someone will come up with a workaround and be told, we have a word for that now.
I always check if there's a word that I need and I don't know what it is. I always double check to see if it's around, and if it's not, then I might ask some people. I've made a few posts in things like Learn Klingon or Klingon Horjak with Pu. But hey, I'm trying to translate this exact thing. Do we have a word? And sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, hey, here's a word that you might not have seen. But we do have a question. This is actually a $4.99 super chat. So thank you very much, Vandalia1998. And he asks, is there different Klingon accents, and has it changed in Klingon history, like Latin to Italian, like on Earth? The answer to the first one is yes, and that second one is kinda.
Oh, absolutely, kind of. Yes. Okay, there are lots of different modern Klingon accents, if you want to call them that, due to trying to make the actors' mispronunciations official.
Right.
There's one particular accent that is described in great detail in Klingon for the Galactic Traveler, and it sounds just like someone who doesn't know how to speak Klingon trying to speak Klingon.
Basically, yeah. It's how to speak Klingon with an American English accent is basically what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. There is also one other Klingon accent, which you hear a lot on The Big Bang Theory. It's not described anywhere. It is a result of the people listening to the model for them to emulate to speak and overcompensating for a slight British accent and putting in a lot of extra where there isn't supposed to be one, because there isn't one in what they're listening to, but it sounds like there's one missing, so they put it in.
Yeah, I will give The Big Bang Theory this. They usually do a pretty decent job with their translation work. Their pronunciation work left a lot to be desired. So that was, but you know what? That's okay.
But for historical in-universe Klingon accents, there's definitely an older form of Klingon. They call it Nothol, ancestors' language. And the beginning of a work called the Pakpat is written in that particular dialect or ancient form of the language. There are differences in the way the pronunciation is spelled, so it's obviously a different pronunciation. The vowels all shifted, which is actually a kind of nifty thing. And the word order is slightly different, but doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of, I was talking about those prefixes earlier, though there are a couple of extra prefixes that are in older Klingon that aren't in the form of Klingon that we speak. Me is one, which is they, them. U is, I think, he, him, or he, her, she, her, which are both covered by what's called the null prefix, which is there's no prefix at the beginning of the word.
Right.
In modern Klingon.
Yeah. Although I will say that this history to Klingon is sort of a retrofitted history. So you will come across other constructed languages where the history was built in from the beginning. Right. So, for instance, a lot of the ones that you see on TV nowadays, like Dothraki or something, they had some basic form of the language, and then there was it was artificially aged, if you will, by the creator. Klingon did not do that. It basically just started with just enough lines and words to get through the script for Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. That was it. And then at that point, Mark Ocarin thought he was done. I was like, all right, well, that was fun. See you guys. Well, turns out that wasn't done. It wasn't done. And so eventually he kind of had to come up with enough words to excuse being able to publish a Klingon dictionary. So most of the words in there were just like, Mark Ocarin was like, I just need words. Let's throw some words in here.
Paperclip.
Yeah.
Pajamas. Writer's cramp.
Right. So, but then as people actually started using the language, more and more words were requested. And then when additional movies were made featuring the language, he would be given lines in English. And it was, the instruction was like, hey, what is this in Klingon? And of course, the answer from him initially was like, I don't know. Hold on. Let me make it up. And so as a result of that kind of in the real world history of the language, it doesn't have a previous form in the same way that, say, you might get from like Dothraki, where like you could actually ask, is it David R. Peterson? Is that his name?
David Peterson. Yeah.
David Peterson? Yeah, it's it. David, you could ask David Peterson, like, hey, if you could you write like a grammar and at least vocabulary sketch for ancient Dothraki? And the answer is, yeah, he already has done so. Mm-hmm. And so there is a little bit of the difference there. But also, it is at least not impossible that if Klingon became a reasonably well-spoken language by a community, that it would eventually have some changes of its own. And I have some predictions about what some of those things might be. And some of them are even orthographic, because I'm pretty sure the only reason that people are still writing I's with capital I is because Mark Ocarin told them to. And I think if you were to have a second generation of Klingon speakers who didn't care that much, they would just stop.
Yeah. There are already people who prefer to use the so-called Klingon writing system, or Picard, which has the alien symbols for the spelling.
Yeah. That's what I tend to use in my thumbnails, because the Klingon in my thumbnails for this channel is sort of like a it's like an Easter egg, you know? If you want to take the time and translate that stuff, you might learn something about either how I'm doing that day or what we're about to talk about or something like that. And you can feel free to do that, and it'll give you some insight into how I was thinking while making the thumbnail, because they're usually the last thing I do is I'll toss in a little line in Picard. And I just wanted to I use Picard there because, like, I feel like it's more aesthetically pleasing than just this sort of uppercase, lowercase, apostrophe strewn Latinization, which is how I normally read the language. But it doesn't look as good, does it?
There are some attempts at a Latin font that you can use to write Klingon in the normal orthography, but it looks better.
That
look
would
at
be nice.
The GH and the CH. The capital Q is a small capital Q, a small capital H, things like that. It
That would be
looks
nice.
a lot smoother.
So we have from Jens van Broekhoven, who is a channel member, thank you, and also our patron. He says, what's the best online translator? And I would say ask someone who speaks Klingon on the internet.
Yeah, the correct answer would be, who's the best online translator?
Right. And I'll be honest, there are a lot of people out there who will give you at least short Klingon translations just for fun. Like if you say, hey, I just need to translate this few sentences or whatever. If you show up on like the Klingon Language Institute Discord or Learn Klingon on Facebook or something like that, and you just ask, people are very willing to help. You may have to answer additional questions about what exactly you mean, because it's not always easy to go a one-for-one. Like if it's something simple, like I sat down in the chair. I mean, okay, that's pretty easy. But if you have some weird thing, Klingon has a lot of words where in English we use one word, but in Klingon there's two different words that end up filling up slightly different semantic space, or vice versa. So you might have to ask some questions. But as far as I know, the only machine translation that is available is Bing, and everyone else who's purporting to have one is basically just running it through Bing, and it is absolutely terrible. It's gotten slightly better. I remember.
It's gotten weirder.
Well, it's gotten weirder, but it also has gotten fewer cockroaches. Remember when it was full of cockroaches?
And yeah, that was before they figured out the best way to do suffixes.
Yeah. So the reason I say it was full of cockroaches is there's a common suffix in Klingon. It's vet, and it's a demonstrative. Fills the function of a demonstrative pronoun, basically. So if you want to say that book as opposed to the book or this book, you would say it pak vet, and pak is book, pak vet is that book. But of course, Bing was having trouble just differentiating between the demonstrative pronoun and the relative pronoun. Like, did you see that guy who hit my car? Which way did he go? That in there is a different kind of grammatical construction. But Bing was just completely confused, didn't know how to do suffixes very well, so it would just put in the word vet all over the place. And of course, vet is Klingon as a noun for cockroach or sometimes beetle. And so that's why I used to joke that Bing was just full of cockroaches, because I would read this machine translated Klingon and I was like, why are all these cockroaches everywhere? And then it dawned on me, if I replaced that in like the word order, as I'm like just switching the words from English to Klingon in the order, it actually makes sense if I just put that in there. And I was like, okay, there we go. Now we know why Bing is full of cockroaches.
Yeah. Bing has two problems. One, the training corpus is very small. And two, a lot of it is Shakespeare. And if you're trying to talk about parallel texts in English and Klingon, the parallel nature of Shakespeare is pretty weak.
Yeah.
They're very good idiomatic Klingon translations, which means they are not very literal.
Right.
I was in the middle of retranslating all of the Shakespeare Klingon into literal English translations to use as the training corpus for those, when Microsoft basically shut down. Okay, we're not going to support Klingon anymore. It was about to get a whole lot better, and they just froze it.
That's too bad. I did not know that they had frozen it, but I guess it makes sense. And sorry, Vandeli 1998 asks, so Google Translate doesn't have an English to Klingon version yet? No, I don't really expect it to, honestly.
There is someone who works at Google who knows how to talk to the people to get it turned into an official project. It is not going to be done.
Oh. Boo.
Google has way too much official important stuff to do. They do not at the current time have the spare time for people to take it on as one of their pet projects.
Well, I mean, it's understandable. And Explorer Questioner asks, why do I want to visit? Because we're cool.
Yeah, where do you want to visit?
Well, yeah. I assume here, and I'm just going to go ahead and assume it's because we're cool. But
that's why I started learning Klingon.
Yeah, I mean, Klingon speakers are the coolest. Yeah. You just roll into the Star Trek convention. And, yeah. Or the
there's many inside jokes. It's great.
Although, actually, it is... I have this one thing where, like, I would like to do something crazy, like get some nice, like, Ferengi makeup and show up at a Star Trek convention, and then start something with someone dressed up as a Klingon, and then just surprise everyone by actually speaking Klingon, despite being in the Ferengi costume. I think that would be fun. So, plus, I'll be honest, the Ferengi costumes look way more comfortable than Klingon costumes. If I had to spend a day in one of those two, I mean, like a nice suit versus body armor. Which one I would rather spend 6 or 7 hours in? I can tell you, it's definitely not the body armor. Sorry, Klingons.
The comfort level in a costume like that is mostly the head.
Oh yeah.
And I do know. I've spoken with Armin Shimmerman about it, and the Ferengi head is the hottest of any costume except perhaps Morn.
Well, that's just a big plastic sack that you're wearing over your face. So Orson Z asks, does anyone have a sans serif Klingon font? I'm assuming that you mean for the Latin. But do we have? Yeah, we have one that works that helps you differentiate between L and I, which is the tricky one in sans serif fonts.
Yeah, Verdana is my favorite. But if you're talking about sans serif, Picard, yes, there is. It's called Picard Kolkosh.
Now, that's similar to what they were using on Discovery, isn't it?
No. Yeah, Discovery is a very angular font. Looks an awful lot like the Stargate symbology.
Okay, I know they made a new font for Discovery, and
yes,
it's if you were familiar enough with the standard like Okuda glyphs from what we kind of think of as standard Picard, it's not too hard to get the correspondence there. But it can be a little tricky, especially since the ways that other people have found to sort of do like handwriting or whatnot in Picard does not very well correlate to that font. We've also got what's your favorite words in Klingon? That's a fun one. I mean, mine are mostly...
Early on, I figured out what my favorite Klingon word was. I've known it for 20 years.
What is it?
Chishik. All uppercase, HISIQ. You can put it on a license plate.
Nice.
And it translates approximately as endure me or bear with me.
Yeah. My favorite words tend to be the ones that have a joke etymology, like chote or lung, or not necessarily even just a joke, but just something that's like grabbed from an obscure source. Or aujet is also a fun one.
The word for belt buckle.
Yeah. So, DeSDu, you got a favorite there?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't really pay attention to the puns all that much. Like, I'll often, like, somebody will say, "Oh, I love the pun in this one." I'll be like, "What pun?" And then they'll have to explain it to me. And so I know the puns in some of them. So like outjet, and other one. Rolek was one, which means flake. That's a new word, and it's Kellogg backwards. But my favorite word is which means to drink. It's just a really nice sounding word.
It's a really fun one to say.
Yeah, right. And it's also one that, and it's a great word, and I love to speak a dialect of Klingon called Morskin. And when you pronounce Morskin, it changes vastly, which I love about the word. It changes from klut to gluts, which is just another great sound, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
And
definitely my
that
preferred
that goes back to the whole: are there different accents or dialects in Klingon? And yes, there are, and not all of them are just there to make up for bad actors.
Mhm.
So we also have, this isn't a question, although I am confused as to how you did this, because it says Google Doc Muhwit Klingon Hotulu, and I believe that probably should be Muhwij, but unless
No,
translator.
Muhwit.
He means translator. I thought he meant my translation. Sorry. Yeah, he means translator. So apparently maybe there is a Google translator. If
There is not. If you ask
am.
for it, you will find it through Google, but it will be the Bing translator.
Oh, okay, there you go. That might be it. I am not sure what's going on here. It looks like an attempt to do some Klingon.
That looks like somebody put Klingon into the Universal Translator Assistant by Mr. Klingon. I grow the fire, I smoke, inhale the fire.
I think it means he's smoking, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, here's my serious recommendation. If you can get very easy, very fast, very accurate, free translation services from Klingon speakers on the internet, because most of us want to spread awareness and accurate Klingon information out there. I've told people before, I'm like, hey, you can ask if you want to know what this means. Just ask, or how to say this. So yeah, seriously, there's really no reason to resort to a machine translation. It's not worth it. You'll just get something that's incomprehensible.
If you do a machine translation of "Will you marry me?" it's likely to come out as "I cannot trust myself." That actually happened. Somebody gave his fiance or gave his girlfriend a ring with the note in Klingon that said, "I cannot trust myself."
Don't do that. Don't be that guy. We have from Vandali 1998. Is Klingon the only language? Is it Klingon the only language that has a vast translation, or is there Vulcan, Andorian, Romulans, and others? So there is some Vulcan that is officially in the movies that happens. It's certainly nothing else in Star Trek that's as fleshed out as Klingon, at least not in canon.
Now there is Romulan now.
Oh, is Romulan as fleshed out?
Not as fleshed out as Klingon, but it's got a lot of real vocabulary and grammar. Not published anywhere that I know of.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think given the success of the Klingon dictionary, that might not be something that's too far-fetched that we might get a Romulan dictionary. I mean, the Dothraki, I don't remember if it was called the dictionary, but whatever the source book was for people to learn Dothraki, that did pretty well. So, I think that there's actually a fair chance that in the next few years we might get the work on Romulan for that was all done for Star Trek Picard, and
Yes.
we might get some of that out as a actual publication. Let's see. I think there were a few other questions.
There is also a smattering of Andorian and Orion in the new season of Star Trek Discovery, but it's not there out in front of everything. It's kind of in the background, so it's not something that you're going to see any subtitles on.
Hayden Atoa says, would there be other languages for Klingon? And if you read Klingon for the Galactic Traveler, it does say that there are other languages that Klingons speak that would not be intelligible as Klingon Hol, or more specifically Tat Hol. It means that the Emperor's language. But they have not really been fleshed out in any place that you would consider to be sort of canon in Star Trek. So there's this idea in the background that, yes, the Klingon that you hear on, say, Star Trek Discovery or the movies especially, less so things like The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and whatnot, because that was mostly just screenwriters not caring and writing down whatever gibberish they wanted to. Some of which did filter back into Klingon Hol eventually. But there is this idea that there are other languages, that the Klingon Empire is not a true monoculture. It has more cultural hegemony, say, than modern day Earth, but it's still not a linguistic, like a monolinguistic culture or uniculture at all, or monoculture, I should say. So, basically. There's also an older constructed language that was used in some TOS era books called Klingonese that was fairly well fleshed out, but it's never been an official part of the Star Trek alpha canon, if you will. And I don't know any of it other than that it exists, and I've seen a few sample texts. So
it's all in one novel, The Final Reflection, and a bit of the source material for some of the old Klingon role-playing games from Fun.
Fast, yeah. So there's sort of another Klingon language, but I would say that probably almost entirely due to the alpha canon nature of Klingon whole. People who want to learn Klingon approach Klingon whole. There's also probably a vast amount more that you can learn to say in Klingon whole than at Klingonese. So let's see. Explorer Questioner says, hypothetical question, and maybe this is a little Isaac Asimov of me, but do you see Klingon possibly being a major language 1,000 years from now? I honestly don't. I don't think it's going to be gaining a sustainable population of native speakers at any point. I think let's go ahead.
I wouldn't bank on it. But,
yeah.
But I actually currently am writing a novel that's based on this concept of what if there was like this village of Klingon speakers, and what are their what do their descendants look like? And it also goes into what would the descendants of Klingon only speakers, what would they make the language into? So.
I will say this. I do think the two things that I would expect to see if Klingon actually became a living language, I think the obligatory topic marker at the end of sentences with a pronoun, a personal pronoun standing in as the verb, I think that would probably end up going away. It doesn't seem to be carrying much. It doesn't seem to be carrying a lot of weight, either grammatically or semantically. So I think that would probably get axed pretty fast. I also actually think that more words would end up like nech want, in that you don't always need the pronoun for sentence as object for et. Mm-hmm. Like I think other things like maybe khub or kal might start dropping the et as sentence as object pronoun. Basically just because you would use them so often with the previous sentence as the object that it would just become something where it's like, well, yeah, I'm saying v'khub. I think this is the case, so I don't always have to say et v'khub. I can just say the sentence and then say v'khub. So I think that's two changes I think I would actually expect to see if Klingon became a living language that started to evolve naturally as a result of native speakers simply trying to go through their lives. Do you guys have any other? Do you disagree, or any other things you would think would change?
There are a couple of really odd bits of pronunciation that I would expect to get more assimilation. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Let's see.
I was just going to say there are two other things that I would maybe expect and figure into this constructed form of way future Klingon that I'm thinking about. I think that the prefix system would simplify a lot. I think you would see like Vin and Da and Bo all sort of break up and have different, form a little bit differently. And then I think also you'd have an expansion of like, right now there are words like der, which is helm. And der can also be a slang term that means to wing it. But there's no like official non-slang term der, but you might expect it to be like steer. And then you also have things like, what's the thing I'm trying to think of? Hub is both a noun and a verb, I think. No, hub is not. Hub is just a verb.
Although it's used somewhere that makes it look like it's a noun also. So we also have
anyway, things like that.
There are some terms that don't seem to have a corresponding noun version or a corresponding verb version.
Yeah, I would expect some of those to get put across. And I know that we don't currently have an official rule for how verbs are nominalized or how you could verbalize various nouns. But I think that such a thing would probably develop based on the patterns that we already have for nouns and corresponding identical sounding verbs. Because there are some obvious patterns, and they're unsurprisingly similar to English because, the language was created by a native English speaker. So, yeah.
You're saying that the word verb would become a verb in Klingon eventually.
It might. You might be able to verb. That would be fun. So this is not a question, but it is always fun. Kazumi Matsumoto says Klingon mach, and technically not true, but it is appreciated.
Klingon jich bet, kol v'jatnech. I'm not a Klingon. I just speak the language.
All right, let's see. How do you say "help me"? A cat is inside of my head in Klingon, just in case a cat somehow winds up in. So that actually, despite that the cat being something that most human animal or Terran animals don't have great translations, but cat actually does have a pretty good one. So that one can work. So the grammar there is a little weird in Klingon compared to say English. So the first thing you have to get through is inside my head is the first thing that's going to happen. So so first you're going to start with your head, right? So that's notch. So notchwidge, and then you have to get to inside, right? And so that's going to be code. So notchwidge code doc. So doc is a locative suffix. It means that whatever is happening in the rest of the sentence, that's roughly where it's happening. So notchwidge code is the inside of my head. Notchwidge code doc is okay. So now this whole sentence is taking place inside my head. Then you get to the cat v'chro, and then you have tu'lu, which is there is, and then the help me part, right? So you get chach is the verb, and it would be chach. And of course, just like in English, you could put that before or after, and it would still mean the same thing. You could say, a cat is inside of my head, help me, or help me, a cat's inside my head. So yeah, that's going through that whole thing. So yeah, that is... Yeah, so that is, nicely enough, you actually picked an animal that I can give a really good translation for, because v'chro is one of the few animals that have like, okay, technically this is supposed to refer to some Klingon animal, but everyone just uses it for the word cat. So let's see.
What verb did you use in that sentence?
I use tu'lu.
Okay.
Yeah. Which you could probably come up with other things like, I don't know, maybe you could say something like v'shampu. If you just discovered this cat after looking through your head and you found that there's a cat in there. But yeah, the normal verb you would use there is tu'lu, which means there is or there are. And it has some weird grammatical fiddly bits there that make it a little bit confusing.
One finds.
Yeah.
One finds a cat.
Yeah, in my head.
Interior of my head.
Yeah, not which. So yeah.
When you can in a Klingon conversation, when you get to a place where you use tu'lu, but it's not.
You're actually trying to use like
one observes or one finds.
You just broke up a lot. You might have to repeat that. Sorry. Oh,
did I freeze?
Yeah, you did. You roboted out and froze. Sorry about that.
It's a great moment when you actually use tu'lu as one observes or one finds, rather than in the sense of tu'lu there is.
Yeah, it's always weird.
Yeah, it's a little weird when you come across it like tu'lu. Sometimes I go with tu'vite instead. But.
Yeah. So let's see. This. Okay. Also, there is the worst Star Trek joke, and this needs to be translated. Why is the Enterprise like toilet paper? Because it circles Uranus and wipes out Klingons. So that actually, the problem with that is that it depends very heavily on puns in English, and that won't work if you translate it to Klingon because the puns won't work.
Also, Klingon humor is very different.
Yeah. Also, Deconverted Man, I have not checked my email just yet. If you don't hear from me within the next couple of days, assume that I have not got it. Let's see.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I dislike about some people's approach to Klingon. They will try to tell a Klingon joke, and I won't understand it until I translate it back into English, and then the pun becomes obvious.
Right, which is, if you want to tell a pun-based joke, make sure the pun works in the language you're using. If you're making people translate into another language that they're not already thinking in to try to get your pun, it's no. Let's see. Have you watched the Klingon opera? I have not actually. I'm not even sure where to find a recording of it.
Yeah, I've looked all over, and I have never been able to find one.
There is one short snippet of the very middle of it, as part of not exactly a documentary, but an extended news piece on it.
Okay. So we have another slightly different translation from Kurg. Now, this is also a translation that could very reasonably mean there's a cat in my head, but it could also mean that there's a cat on my head or running around my head or something like that. So saying "nachwij is less specific, but it does still cover. That's still something you could say if there were a cat in your head.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
that was my first thought when the sentence came up. I thought, oh, that's easy. Nachwij. Oh, wait, that would probably be interpreted as there's a cat on my head.
Right, which is so when you're not more specific with dak, usually you just assume it's sort of like the most likely like spatial relationship between those two things. So for instance, if I said like I don't know, Rashwij dak pak me tulu, there are books around my table, at my table, on my table, probably on. If it were something else like inside or underneath or something, I would usually use another word to be more specific because the natural interpretation for that one would be on. Whereas if you said...
Yeah, we learned the word code interior in an announcement about Star Trek The Experience, where it was there to be explicit that you were writing inside a shuttlecraft, not on the top of it.
Yeah, there you go.
Not originally in TKD?
It's not in the Klingon dictionary.
Really? Wow.
And interestingly, the weird thing though is even without being explicit about that, if you were to use a word like duj, which is just the general word for vehicle, if someone said dujdak, I would expect it to mean inside if they were referring to people. Now, if they were referring to like weapons maybe or engines or something like that, then there might be some more questions like, does that mean in? Does it mean on? That could be a little bit iffy, but yeah, dak is very general, and it's actually this locative idea where you just have a word or a suffix that puts a general location, but not very specific, is actually fairly common. A lot of languages actually have things like a locative case, where you can put the noun in this case, and it tells you that the action of the sentence is taking place somehow spatially close to that thing, and then it's up to context and just your general knowledge of how the world works to give that a more specific interpretation. So... let's see. Do we have any? How would you say
code is listed as coming from KGT, but maybe it came out slightly before.
Yeah, we might have to check to see if the Star Trek Experience or KGT came out first or whatever. I'm not sure. My timeline on like peripheral Star Trek stuff like that, I don't know. So how would you say or any word that starts with beginning with a glottal stop? So interestingly, in English, words that you think of as starting with vowels actually generally start with glottal stops. So the answer is you basically just say it the way you would think without that glottal stop there, because your natural inclination as an English speaker is to start those words with a glottal stop.
Yeah, if you just out of the blue say apple, it starts with one. Apple.
Yeah, we don't write it down because it's non-phonemic.
If you want to not have the glottal stop, you begin it with a silent H. Honor.
Yeah. It's actually pretty tricky. Most English speakers have trouble trying to start a word with an actual vowel. They're just so used to closing off their glottis and building up that pressure before they pronounce the vowel that it's tricky. I have trouble doing it. I have to force myself to think about it very carefully before I can do that. So yeah, it's actually very easy. It's written in Klingon because it is an actual consonant. This is not unique to Klingon. There are a lot of human languages where the glottal stop is a full consonant. It's very common in Semitic languages, so like Arabic, Hebrew, Ge'ez,
Hawaiian.
Hawaiian is another good one.
It represents a glottal stop.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's actually a very common sound. Unlike some of the sounds in Klingon, like not a very common sound in human languages. It does occur, but it's not frequent. So yeah, the glottal stop is actually surprisingly one of the easiest of the quote-unquote unusual consonants in Klingon, because you say it all the time yourself as an English speaker. We have Rech Klingon Cholvad Vitluch, which got to capitalize that I man on Vitluch. Come on, everyone knows that.
Also, there's incorrect prefix in there. It should be j. There's no object, so jitlu.
There you
It
go.
would be, I always breathe it for the Klingon language. That's what that sentence
Right,
says.
which I don't think is.
I'm not sure what that would mean, unless we have a specific like what's it. I don't know. But yeah, so I would say actually that,
breathe and lift.
so one thing that I would say is that mixing up the prefix is possibly the most common mistake that I see myself making and anyone else making, is either not having a prefix or having the wrong one. And it's
internalizing the fact that the prefix encodes the object also. That's the hard thing for a lot of people.
Yep. Which, interestingly, while that's uncommon in European languages, worldwide there's actually a lot of languages that double mark verbs for object and subject in various ways. Sometimes they have a suffix and a prefix. Sometimes they have a combined suffix or a combined prefix, or a series of suffixes or prefixes or something. So actually, marking both on the verb is very, very common. So
the less common thing that makes Klingon more unique in that way is the marking for not only person but number.
Yeah.
Plural objects and singular objects often get different prefixes, and that's not the case in the vast majority of natural languages that do have the same sort of marking.
All right. And this is not a question, but it is a famous saying.
And it is correctly spelled.
Yes. So if that is, it's essentially revenge is a dish best served cold, and it is the Klingon translation there.
And it's one of these phrases that the Big Bang Theory got the best pronunciation on.
Oh yeah, that wasn't that they were in like the comic shop playing cards against Will Wheaton or something.
Bowling alley.
Oh, it was a bowling alley? Okay.
What was it? The bowling alley?
I think it was cards. Yeah.
I thought it was cards, and they
Okay.
Will Wheaton beat.
Okay.
Okay. So here's a great Klingon joke. There you go. Shoot Klingon pu. Robert. Go. So what that literally means is yeah. And so this is basically a joke about the color of Klingons, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because
when that's backwards. Makes
Yeah.
even less
It
sense.
shouldn't be Klingon pu. It should be shuwit pu.
yeah, there's that too. But yeah, Klingon jokes don't make any sense, and at least the ones that are given as Klingon jokes from inside the universe, they're just
turns out
incomprehensible.
That the Dok Shuvwit Pu Robert Shud is funny. Among Klingon speakers who have been at it for years and who have met in person, that really is funny. And no one can explain why.
Well, I think I can. It's because we know it's supposed to be a joke, but it doesn't make any sense. So it's just absurdist humor that everyone is in on. So
Yeah, but there's only three. There's only three canonical jokes that we can tell each other.
Well, yeah, it's a small list. Ask Klingon speakers, what does your Targ's breath smell? Does your Targ's breath smell of Targ food? So this is an interesting one in that the word for smell, right? In English, we have this, this soup smells good. That means that it's giving off a pleasant odor. And then you can say, I smell something delicious, say, right? Which means I'm receiving an odor into my nose. I'm not giving it off. And in Klingon, there are two different verbs for that. You have chet, which is what you say if something is giving off an odor. In this case, it would be the, tarchlij, was it chut? Is that breath?
Kluch.
Oh, tluch. Yeah, I got the word. I did like a Freudian slip there, or not, whatever. But then you also have lar, which is I am smelling a scent. I'm perceiving it, and so that's one of the weird things is if you're not careful on that, you might end up doing the wrong one. And so this is asking if the breath of your targ is giving this off. So you would have to use the chet.
Except that in this case, I would use the noun for odor.
Okay. That could work too, yeah.
It would come out, does your Targ's breath's odor resemble the Targ food's odor?
Yeah. And of course, there's no particular thing for Targ food. You would just use,
The reason why it would be easier to do it that way is because in Klingon, when you say that something smells like something else, you are really actually going to say two separate phrases. You're going to say, like, let's say your breath smells like targ food. So you would first say, "Het nuchlij piu," het nuchlij, so your mouth smells, and then you would put a semicolon if you're using the Romanized script, and then you would say targ shoj roer. It resembles targ food. So it's two different phrases. But then you have this thing where it's a little bit difficult. To say that your targ's breath smells like targ food, doing it that way is going to be a little bit difficult. So it would clear things up to use piu, which is the word for smell.
Yeah. Odor. Yeah.
Odor. So you actually, by asking a question about smell, you got us into this whole big discussion about how Klingon is really weird when it comes to talking about smell compared to English, and how like there's words for odor. You have to use the verb rur for similes and things like that. So yeah, it's it's interesting, just the weird things that trigger in-depth conversations about grammar and vocabulary. So we have from Deconverted Man. I read or heard ages ago that it was James Doohan who made the Klingon language. Is that true? Did others expand on it afterwards? And yes, so James Doohan, who played Scotty in the original Star Trek, as well as the Star Trek movies, and also Generations, because he was one of the only actors who would agree to be in it. He actually made up some lines of sort of, he didn't have any particular grammar associated with it. It was just stuff he thought sounded good. And he had that read by Mark Leonard, who is the actor who's most famous for playing Sarek of Vulcan, Spock's father, but who also played several other roles. He was a Ramen commander in, what's the name of that episode? Balance of Terror. Yeah, I was going to say Night of Terror. And I was like, no, that's entirely wrong. I don't know why that came into my head. But yeah, he was also the Klingon captain. That is, you see, he's flying a D7 ship or something into the V'ger cloud. And so those lines were devised by James Doohan. And then when it came time for Star Trek 3, one of the first things that Mark Okran did was say, all right, is there already any Klingon? Do we already have any idea as to what Klingons sound like, what words they use, what translations there are for those words? And so his first step was to make sure that everything that was said in Star Trek the Motion Picture in Klingon works in the language that he later created and expanded upon. So James Doohan basically made up the first few words of Klingon without having anything in mind as far as vocabulary or grammar. It just sounded good to him. And then fortunately, because they hired an actual linguist, they were able to say, okay, well, let's pick this apart. What can the underlying grammar be? So that's the story there. And unless anyone else, I mean, if you guys have anything to add to that.
James Doohan and one of the producers, John Povil, they were the ones that sat in an office and came up with those lines. And I'm pretty sure, I never got a chance to ask him about it, but I'm pretty sure that Doohan picked one particular word. It's repeated in the first few minutes of the motion picture, Bach, for fire. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure that comes from Russian.
Oh, interesting.
It's the only word that has an obvious, we meant to use this word here. Everything else is just a sound that they assigned a subtitle to. But that one is obviously associated with firing.
Okay. And it really is, too, because he says Bach, and then you see the photon torpedo in the exterior shot go out into the cloud.
Mm-hmm. And then he says it again.
Yep. Yeah. So let's see.
And that's a great thing because, when it's so incredible that, Dr. Okran went back and retrofitted all of that, because now as a Klingon speaker, you can go back and watch the motion picture and it's all very comprehensible.
Mm-hmm. And there's a story about how he came up with the sounds based on those first 6 lines. Yeah, he's okay. Here's the inventory of the phonology of Klingon. The Klingon language has these sounds in it, and he made the language up around those sounds. Added a few others because they needed to fill it in some more.
Yeah, it was a bit sparse.
Okay, now he's got these weird sounds, a weird mix of sounds, including the retroflex D, the D, and the non-retroflex T. And when he was going over the lines with Christopher Lloyd and teaching him how to pronounce Klingon. Lloyd said, "Oh, wait a minute, let me get my teeth." He got his prosthetic Klingon teeth to put them in, and suddenly it sounds right.
Yeah.
Because the Klingon does sound, it's supposed to sound like you've got a mouthful of Klingon teeth, because the original Klingon speaker, Mark Leonard, had a mouthful of Klingon teeth when he made those sounds.
Although I will say, I think the dental prosthesis that they use for some of the Klingons on Discovery is a bit too heavy, because some of them I have trouble like figuring out what they were trying to say through that, because it is obviously a heavier dental prosthesis than was used in, say, like Star Trek 3 or something.
Behind the scenes, most of those lines were re-recorded after the fact, without the teeth in many cases. It's just the electronic processing of the sound that makes it that hard to hear.
That's unfortunate. Although I will also say, watching the first few scenes in Klingon with the subtitles is a little confusing, because the word order for Klingon and English is extremely different. And so like my brain would get a little crisscross as to what word is coming up where. And I basically had to either just only pay attention to the spoken lines or only the subtitles, because doing both, like I can do both in, say, French or something. That's fairly easy, right? Because French, it does have some differences in word order from English, but it's much more similar. Whereas Klingon is often the exact opposite, but not always.
And
so,
in the case of the first bits of Klingon in Discovery, it was an unfortunate choice that they went for really short snippets of subtitle. If they'd put more of a sentence in at once, it would have made more sense. But they had rapid fire phrase, and it just is. It does not match the Klingon at all.
Yeah. So it's very difficult if you are someone who's good enough at Klingon to at least pick up some of that, to also read the subtitles. The Klingon is perfectly. It works. It's translated by people who speak Klingon, and so it is those subtitles. If you string them all together as a big sentence or paragraph or whatever, that is the meaning of what's being said. It's just that it's hard to track them both in real time. And I realize that we are not the target audience for the show. I get that. The vast majority of people watching the show will never know any more Klingon than maybe like Kapla. And that's as far as they're going to get.
The neat thing was they considered us, the people who speak Klingon, when making it.
That is nice, yeah.
We will get it right. And they did.
So this is a question from Fernando Katakai, and he says, how would a Klingon say video game? And I would think hashtag kuj, which is basically just a very literal video game. Because you got to think, video game is actually itself a very literal thing. What is a video game? It's a game that you play on a video screen. And hashtag is a video recording or something like that. Or not a recording, but like a thing that you use to project a recording or a video. And then
a screen.
Kuj, and then Kuj is a game. So hashtag Kuj, which is actually one of the easiest questions that we've had in terms of translation. So that is one of the things. Is that an official term? No, but I have trouble imagining anyone who speaks Klingon and knows those words separately not knowing what you meant. If you said, like, oh, hey, what are you doing? And you said, oh, I'm playing in hashtag Kuj. I think everyone would get that pretty much immediately. Even if English wasn't their first language. Like, there are some people who, German is one of the only other languages you can learn Klingon from, basically. It's very hard to get into Klingon if you're not starting with either German or English as your first language. It'll be nice to see that.
Those are definitely the two languages with the most material in them. Right now, there are, I think, 4 or 5 languages that you can buy the original dictionary in. So there's English, the original, then there's the German translation. For a long time, the German translation was very bad. But then there was a new edition that came along, a Klingonist named Levin Lotar. He did a new translation and fixed a whole bunch of silly errors and stuff like that. But then on top of that, and then there's one for Italian, Czech, and Portuguese, yeah.
Okay. And I believe there are 2 editions of the Portuguese one, because I have one and it doesn't look very much like the one that Nachkrun has. It's confusing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then, like, the extra materials, those are like TKD, Klingon for the Galactic Traveler, or sorry, KGT, Klingon for the Galactic Traveler, which is all about, you know, dialects and slang and idioms and such. I think that's only available in English and German.
Yeah.
But
unfortunately, what it basically means is if you want to approach Klingon from anything other than German or English, you're going to have a lot of work cut out for you. That's going to be a lot harder than if you spoke English or German. And unfortunately, it also means that when you're asking for help, it's entirely likely that the language that you can ask the most easily in is Klingon, but that's not going to be easy either because you're trying to learn Klingon. So that's one of the tricky things for learning Klingon from the basis of not already knowing English or German. So if they didn't automatically get slaughtered for blasphemy by Klingons, would AIG be able to bring the Bible to the planet of Kronos? So that's an interesting question. If you're looking in sort of like the era that sort of maybe like the Next Generation takes place in, it's clear that there's cultural exchange in terms of literature and whatnot taking place between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. So my guess is that it would be fairly easy for a Klingon to get a hold of a Christian Bible at least in English, and it probably wouldn't actually be that much of a trick to get hold of one in Klingon whole. Now,
that's in universe.
In universe, yeah. Now, would you find very many Klingons converting to Christianity? I doubt it. I don't. Some aspects of it, like an emphasis on things like self-sacrifice and the duty to God and your neighbor and things like that, I think would appeal to Klingons. But I think the sort of the turn the other that's Answers in Genesis, in case anyone is. It's a creationist ministry for AIG in that question. I do think that those aspects of Christianity probably would not very much appeal to Klingons. They turn the other cheek and love your neighbor as you, or not, love your enemy as, and all that stuff. Probably would not find a lot of purchase. Now, in the real world, there are translations of parts of the Bible. As far as I know, there is no, unless I'm way out of it, there's no full translation of it, even the 66 minimalist canon.
There is a, I can't call it a translation, but a rendition of the Gospel, the 4 books of the Gospel in Klingon. It's called Good News for the Warrior Race. And it was done a very long time ago by someone whose grasp of Klingon was pretty good at the time, but not great, and whose goal was just to produce as much Klingon as possible in order to sell it. He rewrites so much of it to make it appeal to Klingons, which is a completely different tack than what the Klingon Bible translation project from the Klingon Language Institute was doing.
Yeah, that's a much more, let's actually make a translation that when you read it is actually you. And they are going from the Greek, right? They're not.
They're going from whatever it was originally written in. Yes.
So in that case, it would have been the Greek. So
yeah, well, for the Gospel of Mark, for instance, yes, that was from Greek, and that was Nick Nicholas who was responsible for that. Okay. But other things like the Book of Jonah, done from Biblical Hebrew.
Right.
It's just not that easy to find people who are simultaneously good with Klingon, able to read the original language, and have spare time to do it.
Yeah, that is a very small set of people. Unfortunately, what that would mean is I think it's either a project that's going to take a very, 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 very long time, or you might end up getting some people who say, let's just translate it from a very literal English translation and see what we can go with there.
That, in fact, is how it's going on now for the people who are doing it. You know, they don't speak Greek. They don't know Aramaic.
It's all Greek to them. So we have this question from Deconverted Man. Dapper Dino, last question for anyone. How much would you charge to translate a whole song into Klingon and also to sing it? And also, would any of you do it? So those are separate things. Depending on the length of the song, it could range anywhere from free to somewhere in the scores of dollars, most likely. Like if you wanted me to translate like Happy Birthday, whatever, I'll just do it. It's fine.
Yeah, it's been done many times by many different people.
Yeah, I was just picking that because it's a short set of lyrics. Like there's not much to it. If you wanted me to translate like, an aria from an opera, I would charge significantly more than nothing. I would probably charge, like $40, $60, depending on how long it is or something. And honestly, there's better people to have sing it than me. There are out there people who sing Klingon. You can find Klingon Pop Warrior has I think it's KlingonPopWarrior.com. She has some, I think 11 or 12 songs up there that you can listen to.
2 CDs.
Yep, 2 CDs. They're both.
Another one along on the way that I was very, very lucky to. She asked me if I could help, so I helped to. She did a lot of the legwork for that song. Actually, the one that I helped with, which was Africa by Toto. But then we went along and just check things, and so she, so that's a great one. So something like that. If it's like a project that somebody like wants, to collaborate on and do something cool, then I, for free. But if somebody wants to translate something for like a commercial project,
or someone approaches you on Fiverr and they're like, hey, you're the Fiverr Klingon translator, can you translate this? So it's most Klingon speakers are very happy to do at least short translation work, because one of the things is looking at things and saying, okay, how do I say that in Klingon? It's one of those things that we tend to just kind of do. And so you saying, well, what about this? It's not really adding anything to our day for the most part. We're just like, oh, I would do this anyway, so fine. Here's a translation. Yeah. Like when people here have been asking, like, how do I say there's a cat inside my head? Well, okay, that's an interesting question. How do I say that? It's going to vary very much based on, like, is this a fun collaborative project? Is it you're trying to get some Klingon done for an ad for someone has like a Star Trek license to sell their whatever cereal or something, and they want Klingon on it, then that would probably cost some money, and
if I were asked to do a translation of a song and perhaps sing it for a company who's going to be using it in promotions, I would charge upwards of $100. I did that for the Gummy Bear song.
Nice. So we have a question. Can you pronounce the following? Of course, the answer is yes. But I think the real question is, will you pronounce the following? So, Bent, do you think you can pronounce the first one? Oh, you're muted, I think.
Yes, I was muted. No, I can't, but I can try.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Bortosh bir jablut de rechakku dai.
That's pretty good. Yeah. The only thing I would say is that your R is very English and not very Klingon, but that's pretty common actually.
Okay. There's a bunch of people
Let's
that
hear
are really
someone
great Klingon speaking
better
skills.
at it.
They still have that American R. That's fine.
Yeah, that American R is everywhere.
I cannot trill an R, so I have to do it kind of like an American R. Kind of.
Can you do a tap?
I can. It comes out more like a Z.
Oh, okay.
So DeSDu, you can do this.
Which one do you want me to?
Well, let's
All of it.
Yeah, we'll do the first one first. The one that starts Bortash.
Me or
yes, you.
Yeah, DeSDu. Shoch.
Bortash bir jablut de rechakku dai.
Yeah. And then we've got hashtag vish waram loshad chur shijlach petboch lod.
Absolutely perfect.
And then
Mektach boch katstak shuv koch nech.
Yep. So yeah, it turns out that after a while you get pretty used to saying all these things that not that long ago probably would have seemed like just completely, how do you get your mouth around any of these words? And yeah, you just get used to it. One of the things that helps is Klingon has a very strict syllable structure. So if you can break the word into syllables, each syllable is a chunk that you can tackle on its own. So you don't have to worry about, how do I say, just start with job, move on to lu, finish with de, and you're good. Just job de. And so one of the reasons for that is while Klingon has a very strict syllable structure, it has very loose phonotactics between syllables. There's essentially none. So that helps with Klingon being able to be broken very easily into, there's only one way to say the syllable, and you're good. You can move on to the next one. So that is one of the things that makes Klingon easy. The thing that makes it hard is simply that no language has these sounds in this kind of collection. This sound inventory for Klingon is bonkers, intentionally so.
Which is why I love it. It's great.
Yeah, exactly.
The biggest weird thing about it is what it's missing. It's the lack of certain sounds that makes Klingon sound like it does.
Yeah. So, oh, and I just want to say hello to Ilya. She's a friend of the channel, and she's bouncing back and forth between a live stream going on her channel that some of her friends are hosting and being here. So it's very nice to have you in the comments. Let's see. Am I at the? Oh, so sorry. StreamYard has this annoying thing where I'm trying to slowly scroll down to make sure I'm not missing anything, and it just jumps me to the very bottom of the comments. So I have to scroll back up. Let's see. Having more. What was it? I seem to remember Klingons having more words for red and less for blue or green, or am I misremembering? Do they see in a different range of light than humans? So that is a weird question. Klingon, from a human standpoint, Klingon color terms don't make any sense because the word shud is blue and green, which is a common color term. And a lot of human languages combine blue and green into a single color term. But it also includes yellow, and gok includes red and orange. And those are really the only words other than black and white that we get. And otherwise, we have to do things like use words like bright or dark, or mention things that the color might resemble. So, you can say things like, oh, it's fire truck red by saying, using a noun that is associated with a particular shade of a color and then giving the name of the color. So there is some speculation that this reason for putting yellow into shud is because of a difference in color perception between humans and Klingons, but that's not an official thing as far as I know. There's been no alpha canon, or as far as I know, even really much beta canon about it.
And there's also some empirical evidence that it's cultural, because there are several of us who have been speaking Klingon for decades who are perfectly happy lumping yellow in with blue and green when talking about t-shirt colors.
Okay. There you go.
It's psychological rather than physiological.
Yeah. But to answer your question, though, there's really only one word for red and one for blue-green, which also includes yellow. Klingon has a very, very simple color vocabulary. Now, presumably, if you were to be able to go in universe and talk to Klingon artists or something, just like in English, the color systems that you learn, say in preschool or something, are very simple. But when you actually talk to artists who are working in very detailed with colors, and they have a whole host of technical terms with things like hue and saturation and value and the opacity of various pigments and exact names for different shades of what anyone else would just call gray, right? So presumably, if say Klingon were an actual living language being used by an interstellar empire, you could look into jargon for artists about color, but we don't currently have access to that because, well, that isn't what Klingon is. Klingon is a hobby for a bunch of nerds on the internet mostly.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of on-screen evidence that Klingons can see in the infrared. And that comes out mostly in the fact that when it's time for battle, they bring the lights up real bright, but to us it just looks a dull red.
Yeah, and so maybe that's the infrared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And infrared shows through the steam on the ship, so that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Although I would also point out that red is also, at least in humans, a color that tends to least affect night vision, so that if you lose power and you're back down to emergency lighting, you also have the shortest adjustment period, which is one of the reasons that actual Navy ships, because Bent and I were both in the Navy. Sorry, Bent, I know I'm bringing it up. But they do use red lighting in certain areas where it's likely that you will need to adjust to night vision very quickly. So there's also that other thing, which maybe if Klingons work the same way, that can be an additional reason that they're doing that.
Yeah. There's also in Klingon for the Galactic Traveler the mention that none of the Klingon color terms fit purple. So maybe that has something to do with it. Klingons don't see purple.
Yeah, despite the apparent color of their blood in Star Trek VI.
That's pink.
Or is it magenta?
It's Pepto-Bismol.
Which actually is one of the odd things because Klingons, as far as I know, that's the only instance where Klingon blood is.
There's another one.
Is there another one?
Yes, one of the video games.
Okay.
But I believe every time that blood has shown up, it's in zero gravity.
Oh, so maybe there's a weird
And
gravity
at
thing?
the end of Star Trek VI, when the I guess it's Colonel West, I don't know, one of the guys disguised as a Klingon falls from the window and lands and is in a pool of red blood, and they say that's not normal, that's not Klingon blood.
Yeah.
My headcanon is that the pink color is some sort of a fall reflex frothing the blood or something like that.
Okay, that could be. I mean, of course, this is a headcanon thing, so we don't have an official answer. And the real answer is the producers are inconsistent and they don't care that much. So
the real answer for that colored blood is so that it wouldn't get a really bad rating from the Motion Picture Association.
Yeah. And I mean, why it doesn't persist that way in other things, because we see Klingons bleed in other, like in other series, and it's usually just red blood.
Yep.
And
they were going to get an R rating because of it, and they
because there was just so much of it, it would have gotten.
And now it's they changed the color. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and apparently Kazumi Matsumoto says that first Sunday of every month, I give essentially Zoom Klingon lessons for pronunciation. So that's cool.
Yeah, on the Klingon Language Institute website, one of the links is to a calendar that shows online events.
Mm-hmm. That's really been.
Yeah, go to KLI.org, and under activities is the event calendar.
Oh my goodness, I did not know about this. Jens van Broekhoven said he just noticed that my operating system, Debian GNU/Linux, has Klingon support in the experimental. That's cool.
Klingon has been supported in Linux for 15 years or more. It's one of the official languages, and now it's even in the Mac OS because it's based on on Unix behind the scenes.
Nice.
Very few programs will recognize that and support it as a language,
but it's in there.
It's in there as the operating system choice.
So, Ugly German Truths points out English is a horribly mutilated Germanic language due to the big influence Anglo-Saxon had. So, Anglo-Saxon is the Germanic core of English. If you know German or most other Germanic languages, and you look at a text in Anglo-Saxon, it will seem very familiar to you. Like you'll get a lot of very Germanic words. Like the Anglo-Saxon word for bird is Vogel. And if you know German, it's Vogel. I mean, it's a lot of very, very similar words. The weird thing that English did was it ended up having a lot of influences coming from two different sources. The biggest one being Norman French, which is not the French that gave rise to modern French. So it's sort of a little side branch that went extinct everywhere except parts of England where it was spoken by the nobility. And then also there is
Jersey French as well. That's it's closely related to Norman French.
Yeah, but another interesting source of some very unusual borrowings in English is actually Old Norse. English gets some of its verb forms from the verb to be, as well as the pronoun they them from Old Norse, and so English is very unusual. Very few languages will adopt new pronouns or forms of the verb to be as loanwords, but English was just like, you know what? We're kind of tired of the word she and the word they sounding exactly alike. Let's just grab that pronoun from the Vikings. So, yeah, that is a thing that happened there. Same thing happened with the word are, A-R-E, for the plural form of the present tense to be. That's also from Old Norse. That because there used to be a whole bunch of different forms for different person in the plural for the to be, and also English used to have two forms of the verb to be, just like Spanish does. Like, there's ser and estar. And English used to have, what was it? Ser and beon. And one was active, and the other one was just for traits of characteristics. So if you said, I'm at home, you would use the active form. But if you wanted to say I'm tall, you'd use the passive form. Because being tall isn't something you're doing. You don't have a choice about it, just how you are. But then those two verbs get smooshed together, and so we get some parts of the our modern conjugation for to be are from beon, and some are from ser. And so yeah, English is a crazy mess of
past tense came from one of them, and present tense and future tense. Well, future's bizarre, but yeah, present tense mostly came from the other. It's
English is a mess.
Is weird in every language, but it is the weirdest in English.
It's not weird in Quechua. And Quechua has literally 0 irregular verbs because it's highly agglutinating, and so you just have the verb stem and then whatever suffixes or prefixes you're going to tack on there. So there are a few languages out there that have a normal to be, but that's just because they are languages in which irregularity it doesn't mean much, because you're not getting these like inflectional suffixes that have a whole bunch of meaning packed into them. Like, you get Spanish where one little I can indicate like first person subject singular with a past tense. Like, okay, great. Thanks for packing all that into one vowel. Let's see. Does Klingon use honorifics? Yes, kind of.
One. There is one honorific in the Klingon grammar.
Yeah.
It's a suffix, and you use it when you are talking to a superior to show respect.
Yeah.
And it's nesh.
And it's not even always used when speaking. It's very polite. It's the kind of thing you might do when you think you're in trouble. It's like very deferential.
Yeah.
It's never required, but it might help.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
They're also like titles. So, you might call someone by a military rank, or there's a word for lord, things like that. So, using a.
Did I put it in my the name when I sign in here in brackets? The ut, essentially officer emeritus.
Yeah. So there's that one grammatical honorific, but then you can use specific titles that are appropriate. Of course, you don't want to use the wrong title for someone, but using someone's title is usually considered to be just like it is in English, right? If someone's Dr. Jones or something, it's usually considered somewhat insulting to call him Mr. Jones or something, right? You use the correct title.
There's possibly an anti-honorific if you put the noun suffix "kok" on someone's title. I mean, so-called captain, or so-called doctor.
Right. So there's. To be fair, this is a common thing in most languages. Most languages have ways to refer to people that are considered more polite or more formal. And Klingon does a lot of the same things that English does. You use the correct title. If that's Colonel so-and-so, you use a military rank. And you say so-and-so title, which is one thing that English actually does weird. Most languages, the vast majority of languages, the proper noun comes before the title. And that used to be the way it was in English. Anglo-Saxon uses proper noun title. And so does Klingon. So, if someone has like a rank of lot, right, which is a commander roughly, and they said that there's a name. So we have a character in our Star Trek roleplay game we're doing here in was that 4.5 hours?
Something like that.
It's not here though. By the way, mods, put a link to the next Star Trek game if you can find it. It's on my off-topic channel. Put that in the chat in case anyone wants to come by and hang out with us. But so we have a character whose name is Lor, and his rank is La. So he's not La Lor, he's Lor La in Klingon. And so that is actually the typical way most languages do it.
And
before we learned that titles come after the name, one of the best Klingon speakers, probably the first who could be called fluent, went by Hod Krankor.
Yep,
putting
I remember.
Captain first. And he decided stubbornly to keep it that way, even after we found out that the Hod for captain would come after his name. So he's Hod Krankor anyway. We started calling him Hod Krankor Hod. Captain Krankor.
At that point, Hod is...
And so now...
he promoted himself to brigadier about 10 years ago.
Oh,
so
good for him.
Krankor Etch.
Good for him.
Krankor captain.
Klurg says that he's translated pop songs for about $50 each. That seems like a pretty Like if someone just out of the blue was like, "Hey, I just need this translated," that's probably about what I would charge for that. Of course, I'm definitely not the best Klingon speaker here. So if you have a really big project that you really need in Klingon, my guess is that I would not be your first choice. So I'm just letting that out there. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, I'm better at speaking Klingon than most people in the world, which is not a high bar. But I definitely speak less than DeSDu or Qunchu'wI here. So yeah. Let's see. What else do we have? Imagine a Scream Klingon band. I mean, that I might listen to that.
They exist. They're called Stobopor.
Nice.
There you go.
Nice.
So let's see. I think this is supposed to be Yiddish, but it's not actually. So Yiddish does not actually have very much in common with Klingon. It's a very Germanic language that basically just has heavy.
It has one thing in common: the sound.
Basically, yeah. I mean, there's some other. I mean, it'll have other common consonants, like Yiddish has a normal T, Klingon does, but Yiddish is actually much more like German than it is like any other language, because they both end up descending from High German, Modern German, and Yiddish. And basically, Yiddish was just the dialect spoken by German Jews, and it's often written with the Hebrew alphabet, which is not well suited to it, but it also has a lot of loan words from classical Hebrew, because of course it's being spoken by people who are, at least those who are wealthy enough to afford it, are often educated to read classical Hebrew. So that's one of the reasons why it gets a lot of loan words in from Hebrew. But yeah, they actually do not sound very much alike. If you listen to a sample of spoken Yiddish and a sample of spoken Klingon spoken by someone who can pronounce it well, which actually I think includes everyone on this panel. I think, Bent, that you don't give yourself enough credit for your ability to pronounce written Klingon.
It's not perfect, but it's not awful. So.
No, it's way better than most of the people I hear try it without having bothered to figure it out.
It's better than my ability to remember what the words mean.
That's the thing, is there's far fewer letters than there are words, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there you go. Let's see, what else do we have here? Also, I gotta say, it's nice that I'm getting a lot of people who I don't recognize as regular viewers who are here for the Klingon. It's very nice.
It's a nice mix.
Yeah, we got some. Definitely, we have some of my my regulars, like Ugly German Truths, more Eastern European, but yes. Well, so when I say German Jews, I don't mean, because you got to remember, at the time that Yiddish is developing, Germany isn't a thing. So when I say German Jews, what I mean is Jews whose culture and language is identified with German and the language and that general sort of, because one of the things you got to remember is that after the diaspora, where the Jewish people sort of scattered everywhere after sort of 70 AD, when the Romans decided to just bulldoze Jerusalem and build their own Roman city on top of it, the Jews became basically a subculture embedded within larger cultures. So Russian Jews had a lot in common with non-Jewish Russians, including in their language, the foods that they were growing in their farms and things like this, right? And so a segment of these Jews that scattered ended up becoming what you might call German Jews, and they all spoke at first, German, went to High German, and eventually it diverged into Yiddish. But just like German-speaking people who weren't Jewish, the more general Christian population of Germans, they also spread into lots of areas in Eastern Europe, like the Czech Republic or Poland, and I'm using the modern borders, which is one of the excuses that in World War II was given for all of these invasions. Was like, I'm just trying to reunite all the Germans. And it's like, oh, that's convenient, isn't it? Because there's little pockets of them spread everywhere. Handy that. So, and now I don't even know why we're on to in-depth discussions about the Eastern linguistics of European. Yeah, it's, yeah. So let's see. We've got, this isn't a question, but
she's trying to express that she's giving a kiss to the Klingons.
You know what? One of my favorite things about the the concept of kissing and Klingon language is the Klingon Pop Warriors translation for the song "Kiss Me," which is "Chechop," which is literally "bite me." So that's always a fun translation.
And
Which
and recently, I was wondering, because I've been doing a translation. I was wondering, there was a character in there that was gently kissing to say goodbye to somebody, and I was wondering, is that like an okay translation? So I inquired about that to Maltz, who is our Klingon
informant
prisoner,
yeah,
or fictitious Klingon prisoner who lives in Dr. Okran's basement, and yeah,
top of the line
and
Federation
his
detention
response
facility.
was fine.
That's
Choke
good.
was different, but
Okay.
yeah, it's what Klingons would do. And then to express the Terran, what Terrans do, like making out, is ep, and it's a slang term, and it's using it when it's not a slang term, it means to eat soup. So when you ep chook, you're eating soup off each other, or you're souping
eating each other as soup,
right?
Consuming each other as soup,
right?
Fair enough. I can see the similarities in the actions. So we have
I liked it. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, no, I do too, honestly. So do Klingons have a written language, or do they have a romanization? So yes and yes. The native Klingon alphabet that you get in universe is called Pitpod, and for a long time there was no official like alpha canon way to correlate those glyphs with Klingon whole. But I believe it was Discovery that was the first ones to actually bother to make it official, and they just used,
in the very first half second of Discovery. There it is.
And they used the same mapping that the fans had been using as their primary scheme for taking these glyphs and turning them into comprehensible Klingon, which was nice of them. It meant that none of us had to relearn any of that in order to read Klingon. And also, Star Trek Lower Decks has been using the older Michael Okuda devised glyphs just directly. So, and I think in episode 2 or maybe 3, they go to the Klingon quarter on some planet, and the sign over that neighborhood says "Khotnosh home," which is like mini Kling or mini Kronos or little Kronos or something like that. And then they go to a gach shop, and the sign says "Kach," and then in the background they're talking to some alien. And in the background, there's a stand selling like disruptor rifles, and it says Nuchme. And so that has pretty well solidified what has long been sort of the default for how those characters are to be read. Now, if you look at blocks of text, say from like the Next Generation or something, it's just random glyphs that the set designers thought looked good. You can't turn that into anything meaningful. However, if you look carefully at the bridge set that I made in 3D for the role-playing game, every last bit of Klingon means something, even if it's just some kind of like abbreviation for something else that's associated with the panel. But yeah, all the blocks of text in that all mean things, although it's not always relevant. Because eventually I started running out of things to say about what the ship was doing, and so I just started typing things like, I just had lunch in Klingon. So, but it's at least all meaningful, just not relevant. So yeah, there you go. It wasn't canon for a long time exactly how to use Pitcard, but now it is, which is great. So now you can't, any of those canon purists who come up to you, you can say, well, it's been used as in this way meaningfully in multiple episodes of Star Trek on more than one series. So even if you want to say that you don't think, I know a lot of people are hesitant to really say that they're accepting Star Trek Discovery as canon because, well, to be frank, it doesn't make any sense. It's one of my criticisms of the show is that none of that actually happening makes sense in terms of what came after. But whatever. Yeah, we now have those shows. You've got the long-standing tradition of Klingon speakers who bother to use Pitcard. Although also because it's not easy to use online, most Klingon ends up in the romanization.
Mm-hmm.
I use the Pitcard on my thumbnails because one, it's easy. It's just an image. There's no text field that the computer has to read, right? And also because I think it looks nicer. I honestly think that the romanization is a bit ugly in most fonts. So, yeah, that's my thing there.
Oh, I love it. I love the romanization. I mean, I tend to write, especially if I'm doing notes to myself, I tend to write, in Picard, just because it's a lot less effort, when there's one glyph for TLH, for example, than writing out 3 letters. But I like it. It's not all that hard on the eye, especially when you get used to it. When you when you read it all.
If you find a good font, as I say, Verdana is my go-to font for signs in Klingon.
Oh, and Ilya Moon just ordered sushi, and I'm jealous. I want some sushi. Ilya, ship me that sushi. It'll totally take effect by the time it gets here, 2,000 miles later.
Hey guys, I have to run. Thanks.
But
so
hey,
much for
if you want to see
having
Bent
me on
Hovind
here.
again, check out my off-topic channel because at 8 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be starting the part 2 of our 3rd episode of our Star Trek roleplay game. So stay tuned for that. And bye, Bent. Thank you for stopping in.
All right, take care.
So let's see. Let's see. Oh, why would you puree canon? It's a hodgepodge. So, look, Star Trek canon has always been a bit iffy, but I would say that there are things that have been pretty consistent in it up until recently, and those cause serious problems with trying to fit everything together. For instance, so the Federation has always had a infinite range, instantaneous, faster than light technology that sure they classified, but when say Admiral Paris says to the Voyager that we're trying everything we can to get you home, no, you're not, because you have the clearance to know about the spore drive. You could just build one, and sure, that having a human pilot is dangerous, but if it's for 2 jumps, it's going to be fine. So it's things like that, or like the way the Klingon War is portrayed is very different from how it's talked about in other parts of Star Trek. The common use of holodecks and holographic communication, whereas Benjamin Sisko makes such a big deal about the introduction of holographic communicators in Deep Space Nine, like it's a big new thing. And in Voyager, they're talking about what it was like when Kirk was out there and they didn't have replicators or holodecks or any of these things, and you go and people are ordering uniforms out of replicators in Discovery, and it's things like that where I'm just like, it is very hard for me to take seriously the idea that this show actually takes place in the same timeline as the original series before that show. I do still think that we can count it for canon for things like, is this Klingon canon? Well, it was on a Star Trek show. It's definitely an actual official Star Trek show. Does it actually take place in the same timeline as the producers claim, as say the Next Generation or the original series? I have a hard time seeing how it could. I'll be honest. And they say it does, but I use this analogy. If you're more familiar with, say, something else, like let's say you're a big fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the TV show. Very early on, Aang visits the ruins of his old home, the Sky Temple, and he sees the skeletons of people who were his friends. And they've been dead for 100 years because otherwise they would be different skeletons because they wouldn't be his friends. If this destruction of the Sky Temple had happened, say, 70 years after he was frozen, he would come back to find still a whole bunch of dead people, but unrecognizable ones. So then if someone said, we're going to have a prequel show set in the universe of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it takes place 50 years before Aang wakes up, and there's a thriving Southern Air Temple, you're going to say, well, this is a problem. This violates things that were a big plot point elsewhere. And that is my biggest complaint in terms of canon and Star Trek Discovery, is it's extremely difficult to see how, even with the sort of, we're going to keep everything hush-hush at the end of season 2, that still, it does not fit very well with the rest of Star Trek canon, including the short treks that did weird things with tribbles. Tribbles became magical somehow, where they don't need food. Because one of the big points of tribbles, if you watch, the first episode with tribbles, is that if you stop feeding them, they stop reproducing because they need the actual matter to produce a new tribble, which makes sense. You don't just produce matter out of nothing. And then we have a ship that explodes as a result of tribbles filling its volume, feeding on nothing apparently. So it's things like that that bug me a bit. It's also one of the reasons why I'm enjoying the degree to which Lower Decks is taking seriously the idea that they should incorporate aspects of the the canon, doing things like going back to was it Beta 3 to talk to the people who've gone back to worshiping the computer, because Kirk had got them to stop and was like, no more Red Hour, no more Will of Landru, and then they fell back into doing it because Star Trek doesn't follow up, Starfleet doesn't follow up much. So I like that, and I don't mind the irreverent poking fun at certain things that don't make a lot of sense in Star Trek, like the double-fisted punch thing. Because the thing is, I find Star Trek fans in general are not the kind of people who uncritically accept everything that has Star Trek plastered on it. Like, Star Trek fans will talk about bad episodes and ridiculous things that don't make any sense, like Voyager flying through a crack in the event horizon of a black hole, which that's a meaningless phrase, but they do it anyway. So I think that's one of the things.
About the singularity as having size. No, that's not what it means.
Right. So I find Star Trek fans are, and this isn't always the case, there are definitely some people who are just like, well, it has the Star Trek logo on it, so I love it. That happens. But most of the Star Trek fans I talk to, they tend to have a much more, I like Star Trek when it's at its best, and these are some of the things that it does best. And I also like it when Star Trek makes sense, and we also tend to recognize when those things aren't happening. So I think all of us have like, oh, this was a bad episode, or this bit here is terrible, or something like that. So I would say that we went pretty off topic on there, but I think it's fun to talk about. Star Trek fandom is sort of it's a different thing than I think a lot of other fandoms, because like most Star Wars fans that I know, basically if it's got TIE fighters in it and X-Wings, they're probably on board. It doesn't really matter if it's terribly good past that. Not all of them, but, Oh, this was for Ugly German.
The Nerd Crew, I don't know if y'all have watched that. The Nerd Crew, which is a sketch, an ongoing sketch by Red Letter Media. That's definitely a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is them poking fun at that sort of just, it's got my favorite logo on it, therefore I buy it kind of culture. Which, you know what? Yeah. Look, if buying products with a logo makes you happy, I don't get it, but I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to tell you not to. But also, Ugly German Truths, Kazuya Matsumoto says that Klingon is better than German. That's what that whole phrase means. Although that's actually one of, yeah, it should be Deutschland.
Yes.
Okay. One of, I would say, my pet peeves about Klingon is that it is not easy to get comparative meanings across. You either have to put it into this one very awkward, this is better than that, or this is more whatever than this, or you have to come up with fairly cumbersome workarounds to try to express the same thing. And I do wish that we could get a few more tools.
Adverbial comparison.
Yeah, an adverb, just a few more grammatical tools to make comparing two things a little bit easier. Now, granted, there are a lot of different strategies that different languages use, and Klingons is not a unique one, but most languages that use strategies like this also have additional strategies for comparisons that don't so easily fit into this. Yeah, so I do wish that were something, and maybe those of us who have the ear of Matt can ask him if there are any more adverbs or anything that might help with comparisons. Maybe, I don't know.
I feel like there are, strategies that don't directly correlate, but get the idea across. And so
there are not specific tools, but there are good strategies.
Yeah, and I do want to say, Minsar says,
right.
Discovery is at least the only Trek show who got such a good level of Klingon language and so much of it in season 1. And I'm going to say yes. I am never going to fault Star Trek Discovery for its Klingon, except that sometimes, like we were saying earlier, the sound mix is a little weird. But in terms of dedication to getting the translation right, getting the inscriptions right, getting the actors to pronounce it correctly, all that is great stuff. And I think it was a big boom to the Klingon language as a whole, because Star Trek had been kind of neglecting it for quite a while in terms of the franchise. You got a tiny bit of bad Klingon in Enterprise. One thing I remember very clearly is, I think it's early in season 1, turns out that this human colony is being periodically raided by Klingons, and the Klingon, I guess he's a captain, but he's sort of a pirate captain, whatever. He opens up his communicator, and he's standing there with his group of 3 buddies, and he says "Chejol," which is "beam me up," but then immediately all of them get beamed up. And I remember sitting up in my chair, I'm like, wait, no, it should be "Chojol." Why is he saying "Chejol"? And I realized, oh, it's because they didn't actually get someone who speaks Klingon. They just tossed a Klingon dictionary at someone and was like,
They just stole it from Star Trek 3.
oh, is that what? That actually does make sense.
Actually, that's Mach Joel Yachu. Never mind.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because that is... Yeah, Captain Kirk managed to learn better Klingon in like a half an hour of fighting with Klingons than that Klingon captain managed to learn in his entire life of speaking the language. So, what do you know? Which actually, I do like that bit in the in Star Trek 3, because I think even if you don't know Klingon, you've been watching these people do Klingon enough, and you saw Commander Crude say the same thing before. And so when Captain Kirk finally says it, even if you're not reading the subtitle, you kind of get it because you know how he figured it out.
Yeah.
So
it's one of the great moments in that movie. And I was actually recently watching it with some of my family who don't speak Klingon, and they if they can get it and they don't understand any Klingon,
yeah.
What was I going to say? Oh, and if you really are into Klingon and you want to watch a show in Klingon, that if you live outside of Canada and the US, then you can go on to Netflix and watch that first season subtitled in Klingon.
And I'm not saying you should do this, but I am saying it is technically possible to use a VPN to simulate being outside of North America.
Yeah, Netflix actually
anybody to law.
Yeah, well, technically, it's not
care.
It is not illegal.
They don't complain.
Yeah, they tend not to complain. It is technically, however, a violation of the terms of service. Technically, so if you choose to do that, do it at your own risk, because Netflix can at any point choose to care. They just tend not to. So, yeah, that's one of those things. So we have from Ugly German Truths, what happened to the little babies of Lieutenant Tom Paris Lizard and Captain Catherine Janeway Paris Lizard? I neither know nor do I really want that one explored, because my goodness, that was just terrible. We went faster than
I saw those lizards referenced. Did Lower Decks have a moment of showing one of those lizards?
It might have.
Something happened that I'm remembering, but not well enough to be able to tell you where.
I mean, they've basically been a meme ever since that episode because it was just so silly. Yeah, and then Ugly German or Monk Mayfair points out to Ugly German Truths that we don't talk about Threshold. Exactly. Yeah, we just don't. I will say though, the performance by what's his name, the guy who plays Tom Paris,
Robert Nooken McNeil.
Yeah, he gave a solid performance in that episode. I cannot fault his acting. So, yeah. So for me, Discovery is 100% Trek and made me fall in love with Star Trek again after 25 years. Look, I'm not saying that Star Trek Discovery isn't Star Trek, and I'm not saying that there's nothing enjoyable for it. I just have trouble figuring out a way to square it being in the same timeline as the original series or the animated series or the Next Generation.
It fits badly.
Yeah. So that doesn't make it a bad show. It just makes it a show that doesn't make sense if you think of it in terms of there's continuity between this show and these other shows that are Star Trek. So basically what I do with that is I just assume that none of it correlates. And yeah, there's no actual connection between the the Spock and the Enterprise that we see in Discovery and the Spock and the Enterprise that we see in, the original series. They're just like there's no huge correlation between that Spock and, say, the Zachary Quinto Spock of the J.J. Abrams Kelvin timeline. Is it not Star Trek? Well, no, it's still Star Trek, but it's not taking place in the same timeline, which honestly, I really do think that the producers of Discovery saying that it was in the same timeline as, TNG and the original series was just because they were aware of the backlash from J.J. Abrams and him doing a new timeline, and they didn't want it to be associated with Discovery. I think if they had felt that they weren't going to get some backlash, they would have either just set it in the Kelvin timeline or another new timeline, because it would give you a reason for all the vast differences in terms of technology, visual style, all of this stuff. You could even say that's why the Klingons look funny. We'll just hand wave that away, even though it doesn't really make sense. But sure, why not? We'll just kind of hand wave it away.
The easier way to reconcile the differences is these are all stories told about what happened, and the stories don't all have to be consistent.
That's true. You could come at it from
these are not video recordings of actual events. These are tales of the actual events, tales of the things that happened.
Yeah, you could take that sort of like we're getting not entirely reliable narratives from. Yeah. So that's also a possibility.
Yeah.
So we have from Ugly German Truths. Then in Star Trek VI, with the use of printed dictionary to fake talking Klingon to a live Klingon officer. So I'll be honest, I like the Klingon knowledge that Uhura has in the J.J. Abrams verse better than Nichelle Nichols' Star Trek VI Uhura, because there is no reason that Uhura, as a long-standing communications officer in Starfleet, wouldn't know even a bit of the language of one of their longest rivals and sometimes belligerents. Like, the idea that Uhura wouldn't speak a word of Klingon is just crazy.
In the early version of the story, she did. She talked her way right through it. But okay, the producer, the director basically said, "No, we're going to go for the laugh here." Nicholas was not happy.
Yeah, and let's see. Kurch says he's the opposite. He'd rather toss out TOS than Discovery. Fits in fine with Enterprise and TNG. The problem is it also doesn't fit in fine with Voyager and Deep Space Nine. It fits in better if you toss out TOS with those than if you keep TOS. But the problem is it still doesn't really fit in with a lot of the stuff that happens in Voyager and Deep Space Nine.
TOS fits better if you toss out half of it.
Well, yeah. So one of the things I think we don't always remember is that Star Trek canon became much firmer after seasons 3 or 4 or so of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Up until then, a lot of the stuff that we kind of take for granted as part of the Star Trek universe hadn't really been well established yet. It was still sort of up in the air. Exactly what is the Federation? Who's in it? What powers border it? Even in,
how fast is warp?
Right. All that stuff was sort of up in the air. Like at one point, Wesley Crusher talks about the Klingons having joined the Federation. And now we just sort of, hand wave it as like, he was talking about like the Khitomer Accords or something. But that movie hadn't come out at that point. There was no Khitomer Accords, and it was just, why is Worf in Starfleet? Well, according to Wesley, apparently it's just because the Klingons joined the Federation. But then, did they? No. Mostly because, the Ferengi were kind of a crappy antagonist, and so the Romulans and the Klingons and whatnot were brought back. But then we have to explain why, the Klingons aren't at war, and so, we've got the movie, and so that is one of those things that Star Trek coheres much better by the end of, say, Voyager, or even just the end of The Next Generation than it ever had before. And it's a much more well-structured universe to the point that now you can do things like set a role-playing game, like we're going to be playing later, in the universe and have it make sense for the most part. There's not a whole lot that you can look at and just say, no, that doesn't make any sense. Let's see. Discovery shows how Starfleet lost knowledge of the spore drive in the future. When Discovery left, they deleted all knowledge of it so that Control could never find them. Yeah. You can't delete all knowledge of it. You can delete all computer files unless you kill literally everyone who knew about it. And then yourself, about it. And it's going to be classified somewhere. So, yeah. And also, a gag order on Spock doesn't really explain why his full human adopted sister never comes up. Which also, it's one of the reasons I don't like Cybok. Because we never had anyone talking about Spock having a brother.
Well, you never talked about Spock's parents until they showed up.
But they showed up very early on, though.
Yeah.
But
he had never mentioned them. He had never said who they were.
Right. But the thing is, I don't just go around talking about my parents all the time. But once they do come up, like if I were to bring my parents onto stream, then the subject of my family would come up. In fact, my brother has been on my show. And so we've talked about the fact that, like we've got a sister and another brother and, things like that. It's the kind of thing that once the family gets introduced, you tend to very quickly get a full cast, and you don't normally in real life find out about a half brother who's from someone whose family you already know decades later. Like it would be a little odd if, say, like one of my personal friends who knew my family found out 30 years after they met me. Oh, I also have a half brother. I just never mentioned him. Sorry about that. That's one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of Cybok. I wish they had come up with something a little bit different. Like, couldn't he just be Spock's cousin? Because that would be okay. I don't talk, if I mention my immediate family, I'm not talking about all my cousins. But you know what? It's fine. It's fine. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Are you and the other two fans of James Bond movie series and or the video games? I'm sort of uneven when it comes to Bond movies. Basically, I think of Bond movies as this is a spy thriller movie that's going to be a little bit ridiculous on purpose, but I don't really think of them as like a series of movies that connect to each other, because with very few exceptions, they tend not to. And so for me, it's sort of like a genre rather than a series. Granted, it's a copyrighted genre, which is itself a little weird. But so yeah, I can't really give an answer to do I like James Bond as a whole. It's sort of like saying, do I like sci-fi? Well, some of it.
Yeah, I think, those don't really. I tried reading them recently. I picked up the first one and I read it, and I was just blown away by how horribly it's aged. It's extremely misogynistic, and there wasn't much plot to it, honestly. It was, but the movies are better. I those, especially the more recent ones, they haven't had a chance to horribly age yet.
Yeah. We also have Star Trek V as the Matrix sequels of Star Trek. To some extent. Yeah. Going and shooting God, or someone purporting to shoot God, it's a weird plot.
We don't
mention 5.
I don't know. 5 has some of the best Klingon.
There is that too.
I'm of two minds about it.
Well, that's my thing for a lot of things. Is there's usually several different ways in which I judge anything. So, for instance, I was recently on someone else's channel with a panel of people I know, and this is very much not on Star Trek or Klingon, but we were sort of reviewing memes from that organization, Answers in Genesis, that was mentioned earlier. And so we had sort of different ratings. And so we would rate on like how legitimately amusing is it to us, but then there would also be sort of like an irony meter, like, or how effective is it at getting across the message they want it to. But I'm going to have to say that we're not going to be taking any more questions, because I do try to keep these under an hour. And so I'm going to we'll ask DeSDu and then Qunchu'wI for their closing remarks, and I will give mine, and then we'll be out. So DeSDu.
All right. Everybody learn some Klingon. Go buy the Klingon dictionary. It's a great read. Klingon's a great language to learn. Go to the KLI's website, kli.org. And if you want, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, which is DeSDu. That's JATLH, capital D, E, capital S, capital D, U, apostrophe.
Or more easily, open up the description of this video.
And you'll find a whole bunch of Klingon language content there. I've got movies up. I've got children's songs. There's just vlogs. I did an interview once with an Esperanto speaker in Esperanto, and it's subtitled in Klingon.
There you go.
And we have recordings of chats we do every Sunday. And if you want to come and join one of those chats, you can go to the Klingon Language Institute's website, and you'll find the Zoom link on the activities calendar. So, yeah.
There you go. And also, your channel is linked in the description of this video. So if you guys don't want to try and spell it, you can just open up the description, and there's going to be a link. It's titled DeSDu channel, and then there's the link right there. So, yeah, please go ahead and go subscribe to DeSDu. Like I said, as far as I know, it's the only 100% Klingon content YouTube channel. If you want videos in Klingon consistently, there really isn't any other place. Because, like I said, this is not my normal shtick here, is talking about Klingon or linguistics, right? This is an unusual thing that was requested by audience members. So, Qunchu'wI, what do you got for us? Yeah,
well, I was going to say the same thing. Yeah, go to kli.org. Yeah, you'll find lots of resources for learning Klingon, including the calendar of events, which point to other resources for learning Klingon. And there are people all over the place. The Learn Klingon group on Facebook is a great place to get to know everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have a Discord server that's sponsored by the KLI. There is a link to it also on the KLI website.
All right. And you guys know what I'm all about. Show up to my shows, or don't. That's fine. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and we will talk to you later. And yeah, go learn some Klingon.
Watch. Dach Mamej.